We'll open up this meeting of the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners for the informal and formal session for July 23rd of 2020, and we'll begin with the flag salute. And Christian, can you lead us? Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Christian. Sorry to spring on that. Yeah. We move on to public comment. And due to COVID-19 and social distancing requirements, we encourage anyone wishing to submit general public comment or comments on agenda items to do so in written format by email at bocinfo@co.yamhill.or.us or by mail at 535 Northeast 5th Street, McMinnville, Oregon 97128. Any comments received prior to the meeting will be shared with the Board of Commissioners and submitted to the record. And Carolina, I didn't see anything that was immediately obvious as, okay, public comment. Okay, thank you. Move on to item D, which is our work session. And D1 is a work session on community requests, review, and process. And Ken, it has your name on it, so how would you like to lead us off in that?
And let me lead off by saying first to apologize that I did not realize that today was the day that we were scheduled to have this work session. So
apology accepted from one person. So, okay. Mary's gonna hold out.
It's unanimous.
Oh, right.
It's unanimous.
So
Don't let it happen again.
yeah, and so really, I think what we were hoping to discuss, because as you know, during the budget process, we had a number of requests. We get community requests each year, and they are more along the lines of a grant request that we get during the budget process. And the thoughts and the ideas that I'm hoping to proceed or get consensus from the board. And I know we've talked about this several times on what that process and program, that whether or not we can refine that to more mirror or, what we've done for economic development grants, and to where we have a defined process of application period, solicit requests, have a review committee that then comes forward and makes the recommendations of the board to then act on. As you know, during the budget committee process, the budget committee and the board, part of the budget process, it was determined that we weren't going to approve any of the requests that we had. And that, however, we did set aside funds in the landfill license reserve in particular, where we pulled funds out of the reserve for the future and put it into a line that would be available for considerations for requests. I guess at this point, what I would like to do is solicit your input on what you would like to see. And my plan is working with Carrie Martin, that we would put together the framework. Again, we're going to follow what we've done for the economic development grants to a certain degree, but there's going to be decisions that need to be made about how much funding we want to make available, what those community requests, eligibility requirements for those requests, things like that. And admittedly, I would have liked to maybe presented a little bit more or of a recommendation on what some of that would look like, but unfortunately time got away from us.
I think overall, we have a pretty good idea of how it worked last time.
Mhm.
And I think the only questions, one of the questions that I have is who would be on the review committee and how much input would the commissioners have? Because, we're pretty much intimately acquainted with the specific groups or the needs or the community members who have been coming to us and we've been working with over the years. So I'd want to have some input there.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that Ken was talking about was what I was thinking about, was that it seems like establishing a review committee to reflect what we would like to see, and is probably one of the more important parts.
I personally, I like the idea of using the same process that we used for EDAC. for our economic development grants, because it seemed to take, all the comments I heard, it seemed to take, the way we set with zip code and every city gets them, it seemed to take a lot of the favoritism
Mhm.
out of it. And I did know with the service requests this budget period, we spent a lot of time talking about these different ones. And I think what I would like to see is where we talk about during the budget, how much money we're gonna set aside for it, turn over to the committee, but this could be a little bit different that towards the end, that we have more of a say. I mean, I still think we need a review committee. And because we still, I think all of us have our druthers of organizations we would approve based on our knowledge. But that was one of the issues we had with the economic development. So one commissioner tried to push us in one way, another commissioner tried to push it this way. And I think the only way you get away from that is letting a advisory committee, do their job, recommend, and then when it comes back to us, we can do what we did in economic development and say, well, what about this? We're not so sure about this one, or why didn't you grant this one, or how come you granted this one and not that one? So I think that as long as we at the final end have that review and say of who's getting what, because you know more about like Provoking Hope and all those kind of organizations than I do, and everybody has their own that we know more about. And so I don't want to dictate to this advisory committee what they recommend. I want it to where they recommend what they think is right without knowing all the knowledge. But then when it comes to us at the end, we can say, well, yeah, but maybe this one was more important than that one. But I think following the process we have, even though there will be minor changes, following that framework, I think is an excellent idea. But I do agree, Mary, that someplace during the end of the process, after we get all the recommendations, that's when the commissioners, we should sit back and ask those kind of questions, much like we did in the EDAC. And the only thing the budget committee should be set is determine what, as part of the budget, how much money we're going to set aside for that. And once the budget committee does that, then they're totally out of granting it.
And where it comes from.
Right, and
The
where it
fund.
comes from. That's, because to me, that's not a budget committee item. The budget committee to say, yeah, we agree we should put 100,000 aside or 200,000 aside. And Ken says, well, it's going to come out of the landfill license reserve. Well, they don't even have to know that. They just have to say, yeah, we think 200 is part of the budget. If you think 200,000 or whatever it is a good number, okay, we'll approve that in the budget. So,
Right.
Makes sense. And also now,
I'm good with that.
we were just, we were holding off because we didn't know what the impact of the, budget was going to be at the state level or here. So I don't know how long we wait for that.
Yeah, we're still there, kind of monitoring and seeing. But I do think it's going to take some time to put together a proposal, but I also wanted to give Casey a chance to also, before I.
Oh, no, I think that, I think really my comments were parallel, at least to Commissioner Sterritt's.
Okay.
And that I appreciate that framework. Thank you for providing me the opportunity. But we've talked about this a while, now in various fits and spurts. And I think that having the budget committee designate the money and set it aside for use and determining how much, and then having us set up, with Carrie Martin's help, I think would be reasonable to set up who's going to be on the committee, like what type of person. And then we can do similar to what we've done before with where we appoint people to that committee. And then we can ratify, I guess, would be the
Commissioner
last
Sherritt, you
thing.
brought up one point that I think it's really a good point that I try to keep in mind, is that we don't know what effect it's going to have on the county. This whole thing. But yet, on the other side of it, I look at the flip side about it is, the longer we put it off, what impact is it going to have on a lot of the organizations
Right.
that we grant? So yeah, it's going to be an impact on us, but what kind of an impact is going to be on them?
Mhm.
So I think, if we could wrap this something like end of September, middle of October, and get it all in place. And I don't know if, Ken, you think the middle of October is doable, or
Will.
at least for us to take a look at the framework.
Because I think one of the things that, what we'll do is Carrie and I will work on the framework for the process. And the other part is I want to be careful that we're, on what the kind of defining some parameters
Yeah.
on the types of requests, because there, we have the economic development grants that I don't know, unless the board wants to have this further economic development, or if we're looking at strictly community requests. I was gonna look back at several years of the type of requests that we're getting to see if I can help categorize what a lot of the requests that we're seeing, and kind of defend or define what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
Is it, like some of the requests, the mission, there's several different categories that may come into this, and then is this a one-time grant for a,
right?
And it's up to the board on if you want to define those parameters. If it's now because of the current pandemic, that do we want to make it more COVID focused? Do we want to kind of identify some of those projects or define some of those parameters? Admittedly, that's going to be the more challenging part, is trying to define, how we advertise and the eligibility to apply for this type of fund. And again, I think I'm hoping that in long term that it, much like several years ago when all the economic development, where as part of the budget process, we would spend a lot of time going through all the different economic development proposals, that this would help further refine the budget process moving forward too, that we're not necessarily spending the hearing that we have during budget committee week, listening to presentations and requests for these funds, that we have a more structured approach in doing that. And then it also opens it up that if we're advertising it in a structure, it doesn't limit to those who understand the budget process. Well, if you go to the hearing on this night, you have a chance of getting funded. Kind of scenario.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I guess, when I look at it that way, like one of them would be different than the economic development grants that I look at, is that I don't look at this community development or this community support, whatever we want to call it. I don't think that's a place, like when we look at the requirements, that's not a place where I really think capital improvements belong. I think really these are more for program improvements, for operations that give something back to the community. So ones that come and they want 35 or 40,000 for a capital improvement, well, the capital improvement really fit in the community request, or are they really programmatic, or are they operations wise? Because we can keep putting money into all these capital improvements, but if we put money into programs, that allows these organizations may be able to find other funds to do capital improvements. So,
and that's probably something that we should
we
specify.
need to talk through,
Right, and how much or how many of these requests could we somehow use pots of money from CRF funds or CARES money, mission?
Especially this, this calendar year. I think that's an important question.
Yeah. So this calendar year could definitely be different than next calendar year. If we point more towards COVID-related things that for those organizations are dealing, like the missionary will deal with a lot of COVID issues.
Yeah.
And we can use some of the CARES funds and everything. That might be a lot different this year, and it may go away next year.
Yeah.
So
Let's hope so.
Yes, exactly. But we do
it
have,
will.
because we have the money in an expense line, we can spend it and then submit for reimbursement, which is so at least we're set up for that.
Right.
So does that kind of give you what the
I think so. I think that, I think I have enough direction that Carrie and I will start pulling together the framework, and then we'll come back.
And I would imagine, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I was just wanting to make sure I remembered. I would imagine that in future years, other commissioners would probably appreciate not having it set at like, here's here's the types of things we're going to fund, because that'll allow them to have more specific priorities that are tailored to the time, right? We're, like right now, it seems like, in my view, coronavirus related things are the highest priority, and we have money that's, in our minds tagged for that. But in a future year, there might be something else that's immediately obvious to a majority of the board.
Well, and that's the way I feel, Casey. We could, like this year, we could decide that when King gets us done that, depending on the CARES reimbursement,
Mhm.
we might use whatever we put in the landfill reserve plus what we can use for CARES. So this year we might give away, or we might grant twice as much as we would in a normal year.
Right.
Yeah, the
Okay,
one
yeah.
thing that I would look at is anything that would be kind of COVID related, that if there's, with the CARES Act funding, one of the challenges we have for that is it's not like the state wrote us a check
Yeah.
and said, here's your allocation in CARES Act, use it for response. It's all expense reimbursement.
Mhm.
And so just for the interests of folks that may be watching the meeting and things like that, you know, a lot of the challenges that we have with that, because it is an expense reimbursement. So there's not like we have this, and it's not like we have this bucket of funds that's available for, you know, folks to allocate out for COVID response. I mean, we do have funds in the, you know, we're tracking expenses that we're building up over, you know, during the last several months. I'm getting ready to do the second reimbursement request. Even the state hasn't really been that definitive on how much we really have available to us. I've seen some numbers and some information that AOC has put together, but you know, there is a possibility that if we have some of these projects that fall within the time period for reimbursement directly related to COVID response, there could be a chance that we could see some reimbursement or apply for reimbursement, you know, depending on where we're spending those funds out of to get that.
Yeah.
Much like the economic development, the small business emergency grants that we did, at least this time we're able to pursue funds to reimburse that.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I think we're going to be talking about some coronavirus related stuff later in the agenda too, right? Maybe you were suggesting, oh, I guess we're going to add on an agenda item, but it's
Yeah.
related to Economic Development Administration.
It does. It's
Yeah.
more economic development and regional
Okay.
solutions. There was a communication was put out, and I was hoping that we could talk once we get through the agenda, at the end of the agenda, to talk about that.
Yeah.
So next steps, I will, based on the input and the notes that I've taken so far, we'll start to put together a draft program proposal, and then we'll bring it back to the board for further discussion and input.
Well, at least we have a good example, a good template to build from,
Yes.
which is nice.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
So
Kim.
Carrie, if
Kim.
you're watching, we're giving you work.
And again, I apologize that I asked for this work session to be scheduled, and I completely missed that it was today.
Well, you still have, if we're talking the end of October, whenever, you can still reschedule. I'm sure we have a couple Thursdays left in there.
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
we
we
do.
got the bulk of it
Yeah.
addressed.
Great.
Yeah, I think so. You got some direction and consensus. So
Absolutely.
thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Any
Thanks.
other comments on that?
No.
Okay, thank you, commissioners. Move on to item E, which is the consent agenda, and we have none today. Move on to item F, which is old business, and we have none. Move on to item G, other business, and under G1 is consideration of approval for the clerk's office to purchase tamper-proof election equipment from OPEX Corporation in the amount of $34,335. And the purchase order is in the agenda packet. Do we have any questions about it?
Well, my only question is, you know, I'm a little concerned as we go through this. I believe in the security of elections. It's really important, but it seems like the last couple of years, a lot of this election stuff or a lot of things the clerk is doing is kind of a, well, maybe we should have done this instead of this, and maybe now we need this instead of that. And I'm not opposed to it all, but sometimes I do actually question in 6 months from now, are we going to get another request for another $35,000 for something?
And Brian did offer, he has at his desk, and so if there are specific questions about this project,
Mhm.
he's more than willing to join us via telephone. to answer
Yeah.
any questions that may come up.
Would you like to?
Might be a
commissioners?
good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is tamper-proof, even bring the purchase order, the tamper-proof election equipment?
Yeah. So yeah, what it is, I mean, we'll get at the whole story from Clerk Van Bergen, but it's a machine that opens the envelopes that everybody's ballots come in, so that they don't require a person doing that work there. But he'll be able to fill you in.
For an envelope over 35,000.
Yeah.
I think this came up for discussion at one point years ago when we were talking about all the various things were on the wish list, but
Uh-huh.
I think it might have been
That's
one
what I
of
was
them.
wondering, because I remember that the one of them it came up last year, which was
Had to
that
do with
moving-
envelopes.
All right, Clerk Van Bergen, are you on the phone?
I am.
Hello.
Hi, Brian.
Good morning, Brian.
The commissioners have questions for you, but on the tamper-proof election equipment. But do you want to do a brief overview, and then we'll see if there's more specific questions?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
This particular piece of equipment that we are looking at is a larger piece than we currently have. If you were to walk through our election space on any given day, the week before an election, you would have seen a tabletop envelope opener. All our current equipment does is slits open the one of the long edges of each envelope as it's being presented to the board. This new device would slit open two edges, and it also has suction cups that open up that envelope and allows for the extraction of the contents. The appeal to us for this particular piece of equipment this year is that it will significantly reduce the number of humans that we need to have in our workspace to process all the ballots we expect. We expect this to reduce the number of election boards we'll use by at least 3 boards at 6 people. Virtually one of the only ways that we can get all of the ballots processed and keep all of the ballots in our building, unless we were to extend the ballot counting process for 2 or 3 days after Election Day.
And I know how many people I know at least don't want that to happen. They want to know right away. So.
For some strange reason, people want to know at 8:05 p.m., 5 minutes after the polls close, right?
I start thinking about, I think about you all day on election day, but that's when I start really praying for you.
I appreciate that.
And Clerk, I'm going to offer, are there additional questions, Commissioners?
No, I know what Brian's trying to get at, and I really appreciate it. Brian, does our old piece of equipment, would we still maintain that for other standard opening things?
I would, yes. We have redundancy built into every step of our process. We have secondary signature scanning stations. We have secondary scanners for the ballots themselves. We have, right now, we have 2 envelope openers. We have one that we use and one that is operational, sitting on a shelf in case the first one goes down. That's part of the process of making sure that we get finalized results on election night, is to make sure that even if something happens, we have a backup plan.
A couple other minor questions. This piece of equipment, other than OPEX Corporation, do you evaluate other pieces of similar equipment?
We have, and we've checked with other entities that are using both. There's a couple of different devices that OPEX sells, a couple of different models, some lower end models from this company have had performance issues over the years, and another brand has a similar product, but it has also had performance issues. Most recent communications I've had were with the Sacramento County Elections Office in California. They have 10, and they swear by them.
Brian, did you have a hard time last time getting people to come in and work the elections?
We had an exceedingly hard time getting enough people to be inside our building for that period of time. We did. We expected to be as bad or worse this time, and with twice the ballots. We had 30,000 or so ballots in the primary, and we expect to be nearly 60,000 ballots in November.
Difference.
And the building's still the same size. I keep adding water, and it still just doesn't grow.
Don't water it too much. That's from a farmer. I just want you to know.
Brian, have you heard any comments or anything among the clerks or anything about any of the citizens feel, since we're taking basically another process and more automating the process by having it pulled out of the envelope and everything, that citizens feel that since there's not a human person touching it at that point, that there's either more or less chance of any corruption or fraud in the elections?
It is natural for anyone to be concerned about that, and that is one of the reasons why we strongly encourage folks to come by and physically watch our process. We have, in the 8 years that I've been here, never had a person come watch our process and go away dissatisfied. Nearly every person that physically watches the process comes away with a much higher appreciation for how accurate and how stringent we are in looking at every signature. We're one of the counties that actually looks at every signature with a human. Some counties along the West Coast, some in California, some in Washington, are using automated signature verification. We're not doing that. We have a human look at every signature on every ballot before we open it. And that process happens before we slit open any envelopes. So no envelopes have ever, and even with this new device, will ever get opened until after that signature has been verified against the voter's registration file.
Okay, I just have a couple other minor questions, Brian, and I don't remember looking at the purchase order specifically. What is the annual maintenance on this piece of equipment? Because it's being a critical equipment, I take away to have well, Casey just gave me the purchase order, so.
It might not have all of the information, so the clerk can all these things.
Service for model, extraction desk.
There's like a maintenance line of
Yeah, it says
$2,300.
service for model, $2,830.
Right, there you go.
And that's yearly, annual?
Yes.
And what do they look at? What's the life of, before they come out with a bigger model? How long do you look at this piece of machinery lasting?
At least 10 years.
Yeah, because I mean, it's definitely less than 10% of the value, so that's not extraordinarily high either. But do they also, I don't know how many on an average year, how many elections we're running, but is this machine also available to be leased?
This would, if we wanted to use this machine for any of the other departments in our county or any other functionality, we certainly could. This is not a software-based item. It is hardware only. The only software component of this is a running counter telling the operator how many pieces have been processed. It's not connected to anything. It is powered up with a tiny LED display saying how many pieces you run, and that's as technologically advanced as this is.
Does the assessor's office, could they make use of this?
They certainly could. We let them borrow one of our openers right now, but like the one we normally use, the one the assessor's office has been using the last couple of tax years has just slid open the top. But when they're getting thousands of envelopes back with payment inside, this machine would be much better for them because it speeds that process up a great deal. Same thing with the undeliverable mail that they get back. Right now, every year they get hundreds of undeliverable tax statements that they get back into their office. This sort of product would help them handle that inbound mail, whether it's from a taxpayer or from the post office was undeliverable.
Good question. And that's really good to know. Thank you, Clerk.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have any more. That's a good overview, Brian. Thank you.
You betcha.
Thank
And
you.
Clerk, I must say that I really appreciate how prepared you always are for the questions that you get.
We try.
I know, it's clear.
fine.
All right, any other questions for him?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Oh,
I was just gonna make a motion.
okay, thank you, Clerk.
Thank
You bet.
you.
Thank you.
Commissioner.
I'll make a motion that we approve the clerk's office to purchase stamp-proof election equipment from OPEC Corporation in the amount of $34,335 based on our discussion and presentation by the clerk.
All right, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The record show unanimous approval of G1. Thank you, Commissioner. Item G2 is consideration of approval of amendment number 6 to the agreement between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and Lutheran Community Services Northwest, which is Board Order 15-293, Parenting Education Services in the amount of $313,307.16, effective July 1st of 2020 through June 30th of 2021. And Commissioner Sterrett, is there anything you'd like to add?
I would just say this is, again, is a 2% increase for the fiscal year. And also to let everybody know, which you probably already know, that the parenting education services that we contract with Lutheran for are used in our TTRS homes for people who are in danger of losing their kids to DHS or have lost them. So there's a reentry type of a
Right.
program. And so this is a critical need in that whole process.
Yes, and effective too, I might add.
Very effective.
Yeah.
So
I was really amazed when I was delighted in talking with the people who've gone through the program when I went and I visited TTRS houses. So it was very inspiring to me.
very much so.
Sorry.
I agree. I would move approval of item G2.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. The record show unanimous approval of item G2. Item G3 is consideration of approval of an agreement between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and the Dayton School District to provide behavioral health counseling for the 2020-2021 school year, not to exceed $46,584.99, effective September of 2020 through May of 2021. And Commissioner, is there anything you want to add?
Well, the only thing I would say is, it would seem that since we're not really sure what form the school year is going to take, that this would be something we'd put on hold, but we're not, because this is still a service that the schools are wanting from us. And regardless of whether the kids are in the classroom, they're still going to be engaged in some capacity, and so will the community members. So
Right.
I would move approval.
Excellent. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Record show unanimous approval of item G3. And thank you, Commissioner. Item G4 is consideration of approval of the ratification to amendment number 3 between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and the Oregon Department of Human Services, also known as DHS, to fund strengthening, preserving, and reunifying families services, which is Board Order 17-205, retroactive to July 1st, 2020 through December 31st of 2020. And Commissioner, what would you like to add to that?
So basically, these SPUR funds are funds that we get every year, and we are using these funds to support the parents who are, once again, at risk of losing their kids to the system. So the parents are going through the intensive treatment through the program that Provoking Hope works with the parents as well, and also the parenting skills. So it's sort of the three together. So
Yes.
that is one good use of our nonprofits in our community.
I agree. Yeah. Thank you for laying it out.
So I'd move approval.
All right. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. The record show unanimous approval of item G4. Item G5 is consideration of approval and agreement between Yamhill County and Specialized Pavement Marking Incorporated for the 2020 Highway Striping Services Project in the amount of $214,182.71, effective upon approval through May 31st of 2021. And this is, I was going to say, I'll call on myself. This is the annual pavement striping, and they've gone through the standard bid process, and we're looking forward to getting the roads back in shape again.
Yes.
A lot of people would say, well, why are you spending this kind of money just to stripe roads? And I'll say, we're spending this kind of money to save lives, not to stripe roads.
Yeah.
Because you can get on some of our roads and the stripes are kind of worn down because we've ignored them. It could definitely be a life and death matter, so you can make the recommendation.
Yeah.
If you like.
Yeah, definitely. And this is, one of many things that we do during the summer at Public Works. So I'm glad to see it moving forward. Yes, and with that, I would move approval of item G5. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign. The record show unanimous approval of item G5. Item G6 is consideration of accepting a quote from D&D Security and Communications for the replacement and upgrade of the existing surveillance system at the juvenile detention facility in the amount of $31,501.56 as part of the fiscal year 2019-2020 capital improvement project list. And I would say Commissioner Olson, but also Ken, do you have anything
Well,
to
I
add?
did have some questions for Ken, and I think you did a good job of answering them. The question I had is the system we're putting in, would it be compatible with what we're putting in the rest of jail, even though that system is a much bigger system? And even though the juvenile detention system is a standalone system, they have their own control room and everything. If we're looking at a system that's going to be 10, 12, however long it lasts, I would least like to see, of course, it depends on the cost too, that a lot of the cameras and everything would be compatible with our existing system we put in the jail, so they could be intermixed with the same control panel. I don't think because of security that will ever happen, but
Right.
But I think Ken did a real good job of answering my question. I just have an issue of putting in something now, not knowing what's going to happen in 10 years, and not planning that potentially may never ever tie in together. But potentially, as we do modeling and do everything, will it tie in? We don't know. So.
And that was your answer. We don't know. Or is there anything you would like to add?
Well, no, I think just like Commissioner was saying, one of the huge challenges that we have is we have their independent systems, and the detention system, it doesn't interface. There's some areas where there's been some historic overlap with the jail, but it's really two distinct separate systems and facilities, even though they share a common wall, but they have a different mission and different security needs. And also the size and scope of the system is quite a bit different. We've done several upgrades in detention as far as reporters and things like that. Unlike the sheriff's office, which they're in the process of doing a complete, that includes their control room, the cameras, the door controllers, all of those. And efficiency, it would be great if we could, expand something like that to also capture detention and the courthouse. We have several different systems that are really independent of one another, and sometimes it's within the departments and what's prioritized and what they need for each of those facility managers. But this is something that detention we've been working on for several years now, as far as addressing some of the cameras and recorders there.
I guess that brings up another question. The detention, the control room, somebody's in there 24 hours a day, I take it, just like we have on the jail side. If the actual jail side was to just to monitor the cameras and things like that, would we really need somebody in a control room separately to just do the detention?
There have been discussions in the past, and what has really been recognized, and I think the sheriff or the jail commander and Scott Posh, the detention manager, could probably speak more to the technical aspects. But my understanding of my conversations is the amount of traffic, because the control room is actually a very busy location where you have someone who's in there, and especially when you look at the jail with the door controls, the monitoring deputies from a safety aspect when they're going into units, it's very active. And then when you bring in the detention, which has their own intake area, has their own, it's a completely different facility.
Mhm.
Then you start, it creates a safety or security that it may possibly overwhelming a single control room to kind of,
Sure.
and especially when the mission is substantially different when you're talking a detention center versus the jail. I mean, there's some similarities as far as the reason that those facilities exist, but it ends up that because I don't know how much we would pick up efficiency by having a single centralized control room for both those facilities. There's some areas that are currently controlled by the jail control room for some aspects, but we're actually transitioning away from that, where detention's going to have full control over that. It's another project that we're working on.
Mhm.
Actually, we're meeting with contractors today. Yeah.
Well, if any other commissioners have
No
any
other
questions,
questions?
I'm not so sure I necessarily agree with this, but I'm sure not going to disagree with it because the experts say this is what we really need and they have to be different systems. So I will make a recommendation, make a motion that we accept a quote from DND Security and Communications for the upgraded existing surveillance system at the juvenile detention facility in the amount of $31,501.56.
Okay, thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Record showing unanimous approval of item G6. And thank you, Ken, and thank you, Commissioner. Item G7 is consideration of approval in the matter of an order vacating a portion of a public road created through the 1909 Earlwood subdivision at the request of Kai W. Carlson and Spencer F. White without a public hearing. And that is Public Works docket number number RV-2-2019. And we have our esteemed counselor with us to, it's kind of fun, I mean, it rolls off the tongue. Todd Tadlow here to answer questions for you, or perhaps give a lay of the land.
Well, the lay of the land is that two neighboring property owners, Earlwood subdivision was created in 1909, and the piece of one of the roads extends from the Wilsonville Road to the Willamette River. And it's between these two residential properties, developed residential properties. And it's never been developed, so it's wooded, and it appears to be part of the two residential properties. It took us longer than usual to process this. They're the only ones who order it, so we do not have to have a public hearing on it, but we wanted to make sure that there wasn't some public interest in maintaining that property for potentially a future small boat launch of some kind. But it's steep, it's wooded. There would probably be difficult to have parking in that area. And to have a road that goes down there. There were apparently wetlands. We had Parks Director Jared Logston go and check it out, and he concluded that it was not useful for a boat launch, and that a mile and a half upstream is the Willamette Greenway Park, where you can launch boats. Shampoo's right across the river, and we also have the Rogers Landing.
I mean, it's like 7 miles upriver at that point, but yeah. But we have a lot of sites on the river.
Not useful as a
Yeah.
boat launch.
Yeah.
And so this is now on the agenda without a hearing to feed it over to the center line to the neighboring property owners.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, when I went out there and took a look at it, it's like, I
Did
turned
you
into
find
the
it?
driveway. I found
Yeah.
it, but after a while, I turned the driveway and said, this is a county road. Because it's only those two houses that are back there, that's it. So it's like, and they can't subdivide it down farther into more lots, so it's like, I don't know why we're even carrying
It
it.
doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. And I was invited to go take a look at it too, because I expressed that I emphasized that, well, this is attached to the river. Do we have any, do we really not have nobody who's interested, who's a jurisdiction, right? And so I was there with Jared and Bill Gilly and a couple of folks from the Chehalis Parks and Rec District as well, because they wanted to see it for themselves. And it really is. It's a 40-foot right of way, I believe, right? So it's narrower than some of the other ones. It's really not appropriate for use by anybody, and it doesn't currently have a road, as you kind of mentioned. So it would take a lot to have a little tiny sliver. So after meeting them and talking about it and really seeing it, I would recommend that too. But Commissioner, did you have anything you'd like to?
No, the only thing I was just going to say, because CPRD's been looking to replace the boat launch that they had at Dayton Landing.
Yeah.
And, or that, where they were operating,
Mhm.
and the paddle
Paddle
launch,
launch, that's
rather.
right.
So, but yeah, this is no man's
And
land.
get
Yeah.
through the wetlands and the swampy stuff once they get behind the houses. But
And they were thinking creatively. They thought, well, would this be useful as like a day-use picnic area that was accessible only by boat? And it really was not. It was clear that it wasn't. So,
Right,
yeah. But I appreciated having so many people do their due diligence on it,
right.
since it's a pretty specific piece of land.
Yeah. So thank you, Todd.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I would move that we approve item G7 unless there's any more discussion. Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Record show unanimous approval of item G7. And I can't believe I voted to give away a piece of land along the river.
you're learning.
All right, we move on. Thank you, Todd. We'll move on to item
Todd.
G8, which is consideration or approval to declare a non-functioning generator from the clerk's office as surplus property to be sold as scrap to Cherry City Metals. And this is, yes, Ken.
I can talk about it.
Okay, great.
So you may recall that we had a capital improvement project for the clerk's office to replace this generator. The new generator has been installed. It's in a different location. This requires a little bit more work because the generator is actually inside the basement of the building.
Yeah.
And so there's not really and this generator's had an issue, so it basically has to be disassembled, and it's going to be a major project to really get it out of there. And so as part of this, we're looking to surplus it. By the time we finish cutting it up and getting it out of there, it's going to be scrapped.
Mm.
You know, I guess my only question is, and it's more of an operation processing question, when we have items like this that are definitely going to be scrapped or they're non-usable, is it policy that these all have to come in front of the board and say, here's a piece of equipment we're going to scrap, we can't use it, so we have to take action on it?
We do have to surplus it, and especially when we look at the dollar value and the type of equipment, it is policy that the board has to declare it surplus.
And what is that dollar value, do you remember again?
We almost have to surplus everything, go through a surplus process before we can sell, dispose, and especially in this case where we're talking about recycling it and selling it as recycling.
I mean, it's not a big issue, but it just seems like, you know, that this is something that could be handled administratively. You know, a vehicle that's functional or something, I definitely understand. Those kind of things, if the value is over a certain amount, but I mean, we don't see these that often, so it's not a real big issue. But it just seems like that's something we should have to do.
Well, I've seen some lists of things which are comical, you know,
Yeah.
pencils and
Me too.
magnets and coffee cups and
Mhm.
lots of little
I
stuff.
think there was a stack of Dixie cups. So I'm going to try not to call out the department on that one. But they know.
I remember.
Yeah.
Well, I'll make a recommendation and we approve to declare a non-functioning generator from the clerk's office as surplus and to be sold as scrap to Cherry City Metals.
Okay, thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Let the record show unanimous approval of item G8. And I should wait before I ask for nays. Item G9 is consideration of approval to reappoint Tara Williams to the Local Public Safety Coordinating Council, or also known as LIPSIC, representing the Oregon Youth Authority, to a 3-year term to expire July of 2023.
Yeah, Oregon Youth Authority is one of the organizations that have to be a member of LIPSIC, and since it's to reappoint Tara, who's done a really good job, and to expire 2023, and it's a reappointment, not a new appointment, I'll make a recommendation that we reappoint Carol Williams to the local public safety coordinator.
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The record show unanimous approval of item G9. And as a corollary, we also recommended that the committee voted to reappoint Commissioner Olson to his term, so
Yeah.
through the end of the year. But we
I'm glad
decided
it
it
wasn't
didn't.
through the end of next year.
That's right. That's a good point.
Why? Wouldn't you come back?
But I decided for the group that we didn't need to bring it back, that recommendation back to us. I said, because it's already on his liaison list.
That's right.
So, yeah. And you're officially on the roster too. So, but they decided they wanted to keep you, just so you know.
Oh, shucks.
I even voted for that.
Well, matter of fact, Jessica says, how do you feel? She said this about a month ago. She said, how do you feel about an at-large position? I think, oh, I'm going to get sucked. I'm going to get sucked right past that.
It's called service.
Yes, I know.
Totally. Okay, thank you. Done with my addition. Move on to item G10, which is consideration of approval to reappoint Dean Schultz to the Fair Board to a 3-year term retroactive to September 1st of 2019 through September 1st of 2022.
Well, as liaison, again, the cases are reappointment fees that are very active in the Fair Board. You may have seen emails, Gary from Dean, and emails to us from Dean.
Mhm.
Yep.
So I would recommend that we reappoint Dean Schultz to the Fair Board 3-year term, and it will be retroactive to September, where it went last year, and go through September 1.
Sounds good. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign. The record show unanimous approval of item G10. Item G11 is consideration of approval to authorize 33 days of leave without pay for employee number 4053, effective July 1st of 2020, July 26th of 2020, with an anticipated end date of October 7th of 2020. And Ken, I would ask, but excuse me. Apparently, you really need to turn your phone off in order for it to be off. Ken, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I would just highlight that this is working with human resources, and this is someone, without getting into the details, has exhausted their family medical leave, both provisions, and the additional time is needed as an accommodation, and hopefully allow the employee to recover and get to a point that they're able to return to work.
And my only question along that same line is, being that this is effective July 26th, which I guess is next week. I take it that July 25th with that in, that's when all of our other benefits expire, and that's why it's effective July 26th.
Actually, when it comes to benefits in these types of situations, under FEMLA, OFLA, we're required to continue medical benefits while they're in that protected status. But when someone is in this unfortunate situation that they're not able to return, essentially what you're doing is approving leave without pay. It's not a continuation of benefits. They'll be responsible for any premium costs in order to continue benefits. And I know this can be a predicament for a lot of folks, but in these cases, we're essentially holding that position. We're granting leave without pay as an accommodation. A lot of times, this is where it can fall under ADA as a potential ADA accommodation without going into the details of these circumstances. So essentially what we're doing is we're granting a period of time in order, to hold that position. And so then hopefully they're able to fully recover from whatever situation may apply here and return to work.
Okay, well, are there any more questions? I'd be happy to make the motion. So, all right, thank you very much. I would move that we approve item G11. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The record show unanimous approval of item G11. And thank you, Ken. We move on to item G12, I believe, which is not on the agenda, but we have the heads up from Ken.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if we wanted to wait until announcements or do this. It's not really an agenda item.
Oh, okay.
Something to take action on today. But I just wanted to highlight, I believe you all received an email from Jody Christensen from Regional Solutions where there was a call for projects. And there's a call out for projects, and it's a very short turnaround because the deadline is the end of next week. And I had a meeting with Abishaw and Carrie earlier this week because I'm trying to remember if Abishaw may have put out an email to the commissioners about it. She has several ideas for projects. We kind of talked about some things, but we also recognize this is going to require discussion with the board on what a list of projects would like to look, how you want to act on that.
Yeah.
With that being said, with the short turnaround, I don't know if we can wait till next Thursday to have a work session or discussion on what types of projects we'd like to see on the list. And so one of the ideas that I'd like to present or throw out there is if the board would be interested in scheduling a special work session, maybe for Tuesday afternoon or some other earlier time. I'm suggesting Tuesday afternoons because that used to be our informals,
right.
But I recognize you may have scheduling conflicts. In order for Abishaw and Carrie and we have some ideas. We kind of brainstormed some possible ideas, but we also wanted to, I'm sure each of you have some ideas that maybe we could put together a list and submit it to Regional Solutions to get on that list.
Mm-hmm. Well, commissioners, how do you feel about having a work session next week, or do you want to bring a list of ideas to Ken now?
I've signed up for the oldest training through AOC on Tuesday afternoon. So that might be, could we do it Monday? Is that Monday
I was going to offer Monday too. So Monday would work really well for me, but.
Is that an option?
Monday, I'm totally.
I will adjust my schedule to reflect what the board.
I know, I have things on Monday, but I want to make sure that we
I'm totally open
reschedule.
on Monday. Do we want to do it Monday morning or Monday afternoon? Get out of the way?
Either way is
Yeah.
fine,
What
Monday.
works best for you?
Yeah, I should pull up my calendar, but
I have some flexibility on Monday. I think whatever works best for
10
the
to
board.
12 or whatever. it
10 to
takes.
12?
That
10 to
way we
12.
have other things we can do in the afternoon. Okay.
So I'll reach out to Abishaw and Carrie and we'll figure out the mechanics and we'll get the session noticed and get that put together.
and I should say that one of the reasons why I was like, hey, commissioners, let's save this for that is because one of the things that I was going to recommend as a project was to work on high-speed internet expansion in the county through the internet service providers. And you guys were talking about that. So I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I think that's
that we-
one project definitely we can move forward on.
How shovel-ready are these projects supposed to be?
Yes. Well, in the case of some that are through Online Northwest, they're at the engineered stage, if that makes sense. So
Okay.
the engineered stage is they're ready to spend the money and do the work.
Okay.
But I haven't talked to any of the other ISPs. So
Okay,
Yeah.
because we have to make sure, and so apparently this would be something that would be reimbursable, so there's not a question about it. Because
Right.
if we outlay, the money has to be reimbursed, but it appears to be from what our call
It's
indicated yesterday that it would be okay.
Mhm.
And another one of the possible projects would be childcare. So,
yeah,
And just to emphasize, in looking at the criteria that Jody had sent out, it's for capital improvements and or planning projects. So if there's, and some project as far as related to economic development,
Yeah.
rural broadband, some of these other things that were, those were some of the ideas. And, so I'm thinking we'll have a better idea. Carrie's and Abishaw are both really looking into it. And at this point, we have to upload all of our project ideas to get added to this list.
yeah.
And I believe Abishaw has a couple other ideas that she would also like to present as well.
Yeah, I was going to say that
Specific
hopefully
economic development.
I know that there's one of them that's the I think it's the tentative term is the Newburgh Affordable Workforce Housing Project or something like that. I'm not sure if she mentioned that to you.
Well, and see, and that's good, another question too, and it's kind of a short turnaround, but I'm not sure if cities are engaged in this process as well, or
Right.
if they're gonna be looking to work through the county, or, that's another question that we have floating out there on whether or not, and it's something Carrie and Abishaw and I spoke about whether or not we want to do some type of a reach out or solicitation to cities and find out what
Sure.
they're doing, or if they have projects, or if they're already submitting on their own.
Because it does say that it's cities are eligible on their own, right? Okay.
Yeah, but is it administered to the county? Does it administer directly by the city? I think that's the question.
It sounds like each individual applicant would be, their project. I just know with the Newburgh one that Abishaw's been working with.
Doug,
Okay, Doug. Well, I was trying to think of who one of the employers was. Maybe it's ADAC, but
Yeah,
maybe it's another manufacturer.
I think
And
there's a couple things.
I think they were trying to work on a project that was similar to GK machines and
In Aurora,
Hubbard?
Hubbard.
is it Hubbard? I feel like it's Hubbard.
It's not, it's
Oops.
Aurora, no,
Or is that
No.
Donald?
sorry.
I can
Or is
see it.
Donald? Yes,
Donald.
you're right.
I think
It's in Donald.
You're
Thank
right.
you. So I
We
think
were
they
all
wanted to.
close.
Yeah, it's right there. We can all see
the
it.
big place there to the right as you're going.
It's south of Woodburn, north of Salem and Kaiser. I know that was a project that she had been considering modeling something on. So
So
I
yeah.
seem to recall. I just remember. I think it was Brett Baker one time who said that housing that's affordable to their employees is the headwind into which they sail. So
Mhm.
So it's something that, there's a short turnaround time on this, on getting projects, and it is something that they're trying to solicit a list. So I think it's important that if we have lists or projects that we want to make sure we get on the list,
Yeah.
even if it's not fully shovel ready or things that, we just don't want to miss that window.
I do know a majority of the county, especially when I talk to like Josephine County area, there's gonna be a lot, I think rural broadband and telemedicine and distance learning
Mhm.
is gonna be probably on almost every county's
Yeah.
list, so they could end up using the whole thing on projects,
Right.
just on rural broadband.
well, it's been a challenging thing for a number of years to make it work, from what I understand. So I'm hopeful about this.
And Polk County is just about ready they're all done,
Yeah.
as far as their planning and RFPs and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, do you want to check in with Abishaw to make sure she's available on
I will.
Monday?
I'll confirm with that,
Okay.
but for the purposes of getting it noticed and everything, we'll plan on that meeting at Monday at 10.
Okay.
Here,
Would it be possible, Ken, since there's so many of us in here, maintaining the 6-foot distancing? This is one of those meetings that I think Carrie and Abishaw, instead of a Zoom meeting or team meeting, would really be nice if they could be in the room so we could discuss back and forth.
I'll ask,
Yeah,
I'm
ask.
always
If they
sensitive
can,
to the
that's fine,
fact
I
that,
understand that.
depending on individual situations,
Mhm.
I'll have the conversation and see if they can do that. If not,
Sounds
we'll figure out an alternative.
Okay. And they're probably both watching right now, so they'll figure. Yeah, and it would be great if Abishaw had the ability to get a few descriptions together for us too. And I'll write down kind of a vision I would have too for both of those, for the childcare and the internet. And I'll talk to Commissioner. Would you be able to check in with Commissioner Pope about kind of the details of their?
yeah, I've
What
already
it looks
gotten
like.
pretty much the download, but I
Okay.
can get some specifics from him.
Okay, that would be wonderful.
And I
Thank
can
you
have
very
those
much.
for Monday.
Great. Yeah, it's
Okay.
another one of those with a short turnaround. It seems like we're seeing more and more of these kind of coming down the pipeline. that,
Yeah.
Kind of from the state where, hey, we'd like to pursue this. Here's an opportunity. Let's get back to us in a week.
Yep.
Mhm.
It's keeping you on your toes, that's for sure. Okay, well, thank you for moving so quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
All right, we move on to item H, which is public hearings, and we have none. We move on to item I, which is announcements. And Commissioner Olson says, Commissioner Starrett, that was
First, always go left to right.
Okay. Just wanted to report on the phone call yesterday with the governor's office with Leah Horner, and we're on with Marion Polk in Yamhill County. And just a couple of things that came up. We did go over some of the new directives that came out regarding the restrictions on masks and the rollback on the curfews. So a couple of questions that came up. We had asked about sports and whether or not youth sports was going to be able to continue.
Oh, yeah.
So since the governor has pretty much signed on with an alliance with Washington, California, and bringing Oregon into it, and California has no sports until spring, what they're saying right now is at the end of the week, they will have an announcement, and that will be tied to the school reopening guidance.
Right.
But it looks like right now that youth sports will not be a go unless they're individual sports.
Okay.
So that's the word right now. Some of the other items that came up were potential travel ban. And the other thing is whether or not that air travel is also a consideration. That will be updated on Friday. So we did ask the question, and this was a question that Commissioner Pope and I have asked, is that what is driving what data is driving these decisions? Now we have children, 5-year-olds wearing masks. What is driving that? Are we seeing that children are vectors, children as young as 5 are spreading the disease? What is our contact tracing telling us? What is behind what appear to be pretty arbitrary, and I'm going to use the word capricious, moves by the governor to continue to not only shut down the economy, but also with the restrictions on bars and restaurants, that 2-hour difference between 10 p.m. and 12 p.m. will make a big difference economically for our business owners. However, did we see data that drove that curfew to where that said 10 o'clock is the witching hour, after which COVID then spreads more precipitously? So that was a question, is why the curfews? Why asking 5-year-olds to wear a mask unless it's a precursor to what we're expecting in the fall? Some of the other, where is the empirical data? As we pointed out, there are some pretty smart people in our community that are questioning the efficacy of masks and some of these economic restrictions. So that did come up. We're looking for where's the data? What is behind this? And the governor's office, Leah Horner, said, I can't share that because we don't particularly have anything that we're tying it to. I think that's telling. Also, one of the questions I had was how the data is being presented. As we know, we were getting numbers of hospitalizations because I'd asked our director to include that, and that was not part of the data we were getting. Now what seems is that the hospital systems are reporting that data not per hospital, but as an aggregate. So, and we're also seeing that the numbers of hospitalizations were not the current number. We're seeing the number that was ever hospitalized. To me, what's more important to know is how many people are hospitalized in Yamhill County today. Because again, this is the justification for shutting down the economy because we don't want to overload our hospital system. So we have 2 currently. But if you look at the original data, we were seeing it was an aggregate number, which really doesn't tell the true picture. So these are just some questions. One of the other things is that we know we had a community member who was a presumed COVID case who was denied an autopsy. So chasing this down, and how does this work at the county level? The county medical examiner gets the authorization from the state medical examiner to do an autopsy, which was denied 3 times for a 20-something-year-old, otherwise healthy man who died of something in a few days that we're calling it COVID, and we have a negative test. Why was an autopsy denied? So these are the types of things that we're working on. The other thing is, so we'll know more about and also that people are going to have to be required to wear masks exercising indoors in the summertime. This is something that people in our community are concerned about, as am I. So that information will be coming out as far as on Friday. We'll have more directives on businesses, on travel ban, and on sports. Hopefully, we'll know more tomorrow. The other thing I wanted to call out, we know that unfortunately we had a 20-year-old private first class Alexander Klass who's stationed in Kosovo, who died in a non-combat incident, who will be returning to McMinnville today. And so we're just asking people to line Highway 18 by Evergreen because the American Legion Riders and MAC PD will be there to escort him here. And people are meeting at the Evergreen Space Museum. And hope folks will do that. The other thing is we've had vandalism on a county vehicle, and we did have some vandalism that was targeted at the Newburgh Police, which is some pretty vitriolic graffiti, if you will, in Newburgh. So I just want to say that what we need to do is to be vigilant in our community and to acknowledge that we certainly don't want to see what's going on in Portland. So unfortunately, we are seeing some incidents of this in our community, and hopefully it will be short-lived. That's all I have.
I don't have much to add. I think Commissioner Sterrett reflected a lot of my feelings and comments are exactly. I did think it was interesting yesterday in the governor's press conference when they talked about a 5-year-old mask, wearing masks at 5 years old. And when you listen to the state epidemiologist, he was saying, well, we really know that there's issue when you get to 10 years old, but he says under 10, don't have any traces that says it spread a lot from kids under 10, which seemed to be in conflict with what the governor said on her mandate. The other thing is that I do believe when they only use, and I believe in numbers too. I mean, but you can make numbers say anything you want. But I really, truly do believe that some of the mandates being set now, they say, well, science shows us and numbers show us. But then, like what you said, when we question some of those other things, like the change from the 12 o'clock to the 10 o'clock, they don't have anything to back that up. It's like, I had a local restaurant owner tell me yesterday, he says, well, that's no problem. He says, all my customers, instead of coming in at 6, they'll come in at 4. So I mean, what really, does that mean then they'll move the curfew to 8 p.m.? I mean, what is the science behind moving it from 12 back to 10? Because to tell you the truth, even under today's COVID instances, usually, 10 o'clock, there isn't a lot of people in the restaurants or the bars, but that's for some people that work a 5-day shift, that's 10 hours less they get paid for. They lose tips, and to them, that's a big chunk of their money. And so, what is tied behind that? So, but I think, Mary, I agree with much of what you said. If you're going to use numbers and science, let's use numbers and science. Don't combine numbers to make it look one way when they're not. And I'm really upset, and thank God Lindsay puts out that report to tell us what our current hospitalizations are. And I pay a lot of attention to the ones that Ken sends out that Brian does on our SITREP reports. And if you're looking for Yamhill County, even compared to the state on the SITREP reports, we're doing very well. But when you base on 100,000 people and you can't meet a state standard, you get 2 new cases in a rolling 7-day period, and that puts you up to 200%. So you can't possibly meet the requirements. So now you're not meeting a state requirement. That's kind of upsetting.
Can you explain that one? I'm sorry, I'm just confused. What's that?
If you look at our SITREP reports,
Yeah.
Casey, one of the things that on the SITREP reports is the percentage of people, there's is it a 5% or we're aiming for 6% is the goal. But the way they measure it, if you have so many cases reported in such a short 7-day period, it really inflates the percentage of cases you have, when in reality, they haven't been inflated at all. But because the way they do the percentages, it drives the percentage way up to where you're not meeting the state standards.
Oh, so you're talking about that the state doesn't want, or the OHA doesn't want to see more than a 5% increase in cases over
like in Yamhill County,
of a 7-day period.
If we have 2 in a 7-day period, we're up above 100%. And
So
we're
it's-
really not at 100%.
So instead of not using, so I asked yesterday, why couldn't we just stick with using, hard numbers instead of percentages? Because percentages can kind of make it, as Commissioner Olson said, look like you've really gone up quite a bit, when really if you just show the numbers, it tells a different story. And they said that they
I
would
see.
try to make it so that what we're looking at makes sense instead of having to try to parse it and figure out what it is going on. Give us the hard numbers. And Leo Horner said yes, that they would work on that.
And
Well,
that's
so
one thing,
isn't the percent, I mean, percent is just based upon our population then, right?
100,000,
Yeah.
there's so many per 100,000.
So it's still related to a per capita. So when Multnomah County has 100 new cases and Umatilla County has 100 new cases, it's a bigger deal for Umatilla because they have fewer people.
But what you want to see is how many new cases do you have? And really, again, what it comes down to is not positive cases because we're doing more testing, but what you want to see is how many of those are actually hospitalized.
Sure, I'm confused then. I mean, I recognize that, but Commissioner Olson was talking about positive cases.
Well, I was talking about total cases in general.
Oh, you're talking about total
Yeah,
cases.
and that's another thing I want to go into, and I think I've already told Ken this, but I'd really like to congratulate staff. I mean, Lindsay, Ken, our whole staff, Brian Young,
Yes.
the sheriff.
Mhm.
That I look at our sit rep reports very closely.
Yeah.
That's the kind of information that should be reported because it states, like for Yamhill County, very clearly. I like it where all the governor's mandates are in there, that everything that's been changed is in there. And that's probably the best document we have at the county to go by.
Right.
Is our own sit rep report.
And that's a good question. I've always seen it with official use only or whatever. Do we have the ability to make it for the public?
I would have to confer with the sheriff, Brian Young, and town council
Yeah.
on that. I saw it was stamped for official use only.
Yeah.
So
It is.
I'm not sure on what authority it's been stamped at, so that's a discussion.
Well, whether
Yeah.
I know it's because there's some areas in there that use some staff names and everything, but other than that, I can't figure out why it's not in the public domain, why it is. I mean, I'm sure there's some good reason why it's official use only, but what I don't know.
And I seem to recall that on some of the early emails when we got the SITREP report, it said, or the SITREP that Ryan included, hey, if you want this to be made public, I can do a public version. Do you remember that? I remember seeing that.
It did come up before. I don't remember what
Okay.
And those
Response
probably
was-
even specific confidential things like employees' names and stuff out of it.
Okay.
yeah.
Well, it would be good
Understand.
to have that
Because it's
information too.
a great report.
Yeah, and I've seen, like you were talking about, people are hungry for information that's relevant to their situation.
And that's the only comments I have.
And I wanted to follow up, Commissioner Starrett, that if some of the things you don't hear answers for, I can also do a push to seek some answers too. So if you don't have follow up, I can also help with that.
Yeah, so
Because there are
apparently,
there are questions that I want answers to.
right. She said she'd have answers to some of the questions on the Friday call. But
Okay.
also, I think there are just no answers
Some
to some of the questions. I remember some of the questions early on that I had asked specifically about. We've got a lot of activity going on in Portland that is not called out, but backyard barbecues and book clubs are. So I said, why is that? And the answer was, I think you were probably on that call, we don't have an answer for that. So there was no answer to the question about what data is driving some of these decisions as far as 5-year-old masks and exercising with masks and closing the bars at 10. And the answer was, we don't have any right now. So yeah, I think if you can get that answer, I would be happy to get it.
I mean, I'm
however we
not
get it.
not promising, but I've noticed that when both of us are asking a similar question, it's more effective.
Well, if you
How
get
about
the
that?
answer, more power to you.
Well, you know, Jody's been really
promises.
good, and I've had conversations with Jody, and Jody's answered some questions for me, and, you know, they've been pretty good, but the problem is when Regional Solutions and Jody, and whether it's Jody or Ian, they have to go back to the governor to find out what the answer is, because they don't know, and it turns out the governor has to go to somebody because she really doesn't know what is driving a lot of these issues. So. But it's frustrating, but you know, I expect that kind of stuff to come up all the time. And I don't expect everybody to actually try to pre-guess what all the questions are
Oh,
going to be.
yeah.
You know, because that's never going to happen. But you think some of the common things they would have answers. But just so you know, and you talked about schools reopening, and I don't know if anybody heard yesterday that a lot of the schools, especially like the Northwest Conference, Division III, NCAA, they made a decision yesterday that they're swapping their spring sports. So this fall, they're gonna do more of the non-contact sports, the softball, the baseball, lacrosse. And then next spring, they're gonna do the football and everything. So they're swapping the season. So the higher contact sports will be in the spring.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah, I was going to ask if you had heard anything from OSAA.
And I don't know about the high
Because
school
it's
level.
funny how, there's the ODE and the governor's office, but then OSAA should have some, and I just haven't heard. I've been waiting to hear because I saw that the equivalent agencies or associations in Washington, California had made their own decisions.
Yeah.
Appears that they're going to be following suit. At least that's what it appears. We'll know, I guess, know more tomorrow.
Right. But it's funny because it's different than, in theory, the OSAA is separate from the Oregon Health Authority and from the governor's office, so that's why I'm curious about why I haven't heard from them, but
Yeah,
I've
I
been
haven't
trying
heard
to find.
anything.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think they know till they see what they hear tomorrow. I don't think they know either.
Yeah. And along the lines of schools, I've listened to I've heard from a lot of teachers and then from a lot of parents, and it just seems like such a challenging situation. For some parents, they're deeply concerned about their children going to school, and for some, they're deeply concerned about them not going to school. And then when they're teachers, they have their own layered on top of that challenges. So
I won't want to be one right now.
okay. Thank you. Christian.
Just
Announcements.
one quick reminder again, next week is the last opportunity if you wanted to extend the emergency declaration. It's set to expire July 31st. If you want, we can prepare another one to extend it for an additional 30 days, an additional 60 days. It's really up to the board. So,
Okay.
But next week would be our last opportunity to do that before the end of this month.
Well, I would like to see that.
Yeah, I would too. I noticed that the sit rep yesterday, or this week's sit rep, did show that a couple of the cities haven't renewed theirs, but Dayton, according to the sit rep, Dayton doesn't plan on extending.
Okay.
So through the end of August,
I think
An
that'd be
additional
reasonable.
30
Yeah, it
days?
would be another 30 days.
Another 30
Yeah.
days, yeah, we can do it every 30 days. I think I brought up last year, like 60 days in September, because we can always terminate it earlier than that. But I would think, I'd do it till the end of September. If we want to terminate it at the end of August for some reason, we can. But if we want to extend it 30 days at a time, I'm fine with that too.
So the only question I would have at this point, what is the advantage? What is it? What happens if we don't extend it?
I don't know. We'd have to ask Public Health and probably Brian to see what ramifications that has in terms of qualifying for state funding and,
Right.
and reimbursement for various emergency related items. And I guess if you wanted Lindsay to come to speak to whether or not there still is a public health emergency justification in the county, you could certainly have that. But
I would also point out that we have a lot of temporary policies that are in place that, while not directly tied, but they were implemented as a result of the declared.
Okay.
And so how that would interact with those, even though we handled those with separate end dates, but there is a tie-in. with
Uniting.
I think some of those may be tied to the governor's declarations as well, but we'd have to look at all that.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's questions from the board as to whether or not it still is justified, I guess we can talk about maybe having folks come and speak to that next week if you'd like to hear about that.
I
You
think
know, I
that would
don't-
be effective.
Well, yeah, I don't know that we need people to come. I would just like to have a statement from Brian and Lindsay as to, what is this basically tied to for them and what does it mean
If we don't,
if we don't? And then also for those policies, I know we have a lot of policies that would,
Right. I can be ready to speak on that, and then we can have Lindsay and Brian, whether they just prepare something or give some feedback,
Sure.
or we have them.
yeah, and does it
Yeah.
have any impact on state funding for certain programs, if you don't renew it?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one of the reasons is that without a declared state of emergency, we're not eligible for funds tied to those types of declarations.
Okay, but does the state preempt our county declaration in terms of those funding sources?
No, that's why each of the counties was doing their own individual
Okay.
declarations.
There
I
is
think there's some
something,
funding that may
Yeah.
be tied
but I think it's
to
the
that, but
The FEMA?
I think it's the federal level funding that
Yeah.
if the state covers all counties, then the federal funding, you're still remain eligible. The thing I don't know about is the state. If we don't have a declared emergency, how our relationship with the state changes.
Right.
Because I've heard Andrew Phelps talk about that, but he's only ever addressed the federal level.
Yeah, and Brian should be able to give us the FEMA
Yeah.
part of that. Okay.
Yeah, that would be great.
okay.
Thank
Look
you.
forward to that
All right, sure.
conversation. Todd, do you have anything, Councilor Sheldon? Okay. But you're here. Yes. Ken, do you have anything else you would like to add?
I have nothing else to add.
Okay. Carolina? All right. With that, I will close this meeting. Yamaha County Board of Commissioners.
Thank you.
And do we have an executive session? I know that you have